And I firstly would like to thank the officer team for all of their help in providing information and detail right the way throughout the last year, but most specifically in the last few weeks, where I know things have been bumpy and changing timelines. And indeed, obviously, having 2 strategies, perhaps 3 strategies, if we were entering a 114 up the sleeve. So thank you to Mel and her team for that. But where we're sat right now wasn't inevitable. And in fact, it didn't need to happen. Now, some of you will shake your head and say that wasn't the case, but I can tell you that when we were running the council and when I was planning for hopefully a second year, which wasn't happening, which didn't happen, I had indicated and planned with officers that the first Monday, I think it was the 10th of May, I can't remember the specific date, we would meet as a senior management team and a cabinet, and we would discuss the budget, and we would be coming forward with a plan in the summer of May 2022 to reduce what was clearly obvious then, which was a structural deficit. It wasn't 40 million, it was about 20 million per year, with a plan of bringing forward a mini budget in the summer of 2022 to address that, so that we can begin to bank savings, so to become quite clear that the organisation has got much more used to having free money. It had got a lot more used to not being so accountable during COVID period for all the reasons we know why, and that the organisation staff numbers and costs had gone considerably through the roof. And I'll give you an example of what we inherited from yourselves when we took office. We sat down with the chief executive and the senior management team to understand what the budget savings proposals were. There were none. There was nothing on the table. We instituted the Star Chamber programme, which was about officers coming forward with political plans and ideas about what could be presented. And people were coming forward with spending ideas. A bit like, did anyone get the memo? This was about savings. We inherited an organisation that had been through COVID and got used to spending more money than it had. And it's not that I want to stand here and say that was wrong, right, or different. The organisation did what it had to do. What was clearly indicated to us is that things needed to change, and we did. We implemented our spending programme, and then for the second year, we were very clear with everybody, we would be driving down costs. These are the things that you are now beginning to look at in your transformation plans. And in the summer of 2022, those things would have been underway. You can shake your head, Councillor Savage, I know, because I implemented it and we would have done it. We would never, ever, ever have been in this scenario you are in right now. Not only is this bad for the city. Now, that doesn't mean to say the scenarios wouldn't have changed. I didn't know, you didn't know inflation was going to go to the levels it was going to go to. We didn't know there was going to be a challenge with the mini budget. None of that was in our gift. But what was in our gift is getting ourselves as aligned as best as possible for the situation. You stood for election in May 22 and won on the numbers and the budget you had at the time. Councillor Letts can refer to the magic money tree that might come under a Labour government that probably isn't, and all of the things you want to change external, but none of those things are given. They're beyond your control. When you stood for office, you stood on what you knew at the time. And when we were in office, that's what we were planning to do. So this situation we find ourselves in was not a necessity. It was not even an option. And here you are accepting 120 million on the credit card at 5 to 6% per annum. None of the interest charges are factored in your budget. So your gap for next year is not 40 million, it's 42 million, probably, if you borrow all the money. And the rate of interest is variable to the Public Works Loan Board at 1% plus 0.5% premium. So that's 1.5 on top of whatever the interest rate is. So God forbid your Labour government you all want comes in and spends a ton of money and interest rates go to 10%, because you're going to find yourself in a very difficult position if that happens, because your 120 million, if you borrow it all, will be linked to the rate of interest that the Public Loan Board operates at. So this scenario here now is of your own making, and there are councils across the country, my political colour as well, who have made mistakes and landed themselves in hot water. It is not inevitable. It doesn't need to be inevitable. SIPFA were asked to come in and they reported, and they told you you were overspending and under-delivering on savings plans. Councillor Letts and Councillor Filker, the leader, talk about new priorities and principles. Well, I can tell you, you don't think we put numbers in the budget that weren't sense checked by officers. Of course we didn't. And if we did, which we didn't, you signed up to all of them in your budget alternative, and you added another 1 million expenditure in. So those are not new principles. Those are principles that the council operates on. And in order to find the 40 million that you need to find within 12 months and be delivering on, is not just going to come from some random bits of transformation. 40 million is 20% of your budget, plus the interest costs that you need to find in year. Now, you might take the view that you've borrowed the 40 million and a new Labour government's going to come and bail you out. Maybe it gives you, if it's successful, 5 million extra. 10 million would be a push, given there are 300 odd councils around the country that are all going to be banging on the door for the same amount of cash. That still doesn't solve your problem. What needs to happen is the council needs to operate more efficiently. And the best way to deliver an efficient plan is firstly acceptance, which you've only just done. We did it in April, May 2022. The second thing you need is time, which we would have had 2 years. You no longer have that benefit. You only have 12 months and the clock is ticking. The third thing you need is a plan. Well, you haven't got the plan yet. By your own definition, you've just borrowed the money. So all of those things are absent currently, and the risks here are huge. And the impact on the residents of our city are what? Council tax has gone up 4.99% again. And indeed, I suspect if there wasn't a cap, and we look at other councils that have gone down a Section 114 route, it would be going up much higher. Some of you will remember the Labour budget in 2001-2 that was 18% council tax rise in one night. Hopefully we don't see any of those again. But not only that, the impact on our staff and our services to the most vulnerable, care charges have increased, itch and toll bridges have gone up, parking charges have been scrapped, evening parking charges that we scrapped have been reintroduced, parking charges have gone up even further. You know that 40 million is a large number of jobs and a lot of impact on services. How do you transform adult social care and children's and place without cutting services to the bone? Which is what you've basically pushed yourself into that corner of doing, because you've spent the time and spent the money and used the reserves because you had no proper plan. That means now that everyone is going to suffer and suffer greatly. If you have a magical Labour government that gives you a bit more, you might have a little bit of wriggle room. If you go back to the government next year, as Councillor Letts alluded at scrutiny, and ask for more time, you might get a bit more. I don't know. But this is not a very well thought through plan. By the skin of your teeth, you have moved from, Councillor Letts' word, from one precipice to the other. Actually, you've now boxed yourself into a 12-month window. And in 6 months, the minister has told you, albeit you might say this minister might change and the government might change, that you have to have a plan to deliver. And the cabinet, you guys there, are going to be ones implementing cuts, according to the plan you're operating on right now, of 40 million, which is somewhere between 500 to 1,000 jobs if it goes in manpower. It is a huge amount of cost reduction in adult social care, children's services, education and place. But place is limited because you have to provide a ton of statutory services. So this is a very deep place to be when you're looking at what the impact on people is. And it's not simply, this is not the end. This is the beginning of a whole new journey that is going to be with this city for 20 years. So what would have a Conservative council have done? Well, we would have continued on our path of driving down costs as quickly as we could, using the benefit of time, reorganising the organisation, making cuts, yes, and reductions and efficiencies. Very happy to do that, where it creates public value. We wouldn't be spending £400,000 a year on the cultural trust. We would not be spending £40,000 to £60,000 on a climate assembly. We would not be sending off, switching off streetlights when you're spending 400,000 on a cultural trust. And I mean, Miss Dieter said very clearly, what have you done for the residents of Bevis? Well, our plan to sell St Mary's Leisure Centre for housing would have unlocked a capital receipt, which we said we would allocate to the people of Newtown and Bevis to spend on social services and, on children's services or leisure services or facilities in the area. And now you're going to put 2 million extra into the budget to spend on a facility that's not even going to be leisure services anymore. It's now a community service when you've got community services around them that you've shut down. So here we are in a scenario where all of your election commitment, or the 2 election commitments you made in May 22, well, we're going to keep St Mary's Leisure Centre open. You've failed. It's not open as a leisure centre in the way that you anticipated to be, and it will unlikely be. And the second was the Bittern Hub, which isn't in your capital programme. Those were your two commitments. So, Councillor Letts, your leadership, well, that was your second leadership speech, actually, because the first one was last July, where you were, I'm going to be the great saver. We're going to re-baseline this budget to February 2023. You failed. And then in November, you came back and said, oh, it all changed. What changed? You came in with the intention of balancing that budget. Somebody somewhere told you maybe it's not the greatest thing to do, or the political organisation said, no, actually, let's play this game and flex the Conservative government, see how much money they're going to give us. But that all changed, and now your speech is, well, we're going to make this all better and put it all back together again. Well, let's see, because the first time you haven't managed to do it. And I don't really think I trust that there is a strategy here politically to deliver this currently, because there's been no indication of it. What there is indication of is, let's take the money, let's see what we can get away with, let's hope for a new government, let's create a massive impact. Well, it's not rubbish because there's nothing on the table. There is no transformation plan. In fact, every time at scrutiny and every time full council off, we will bring forward policies and plans to balance the budget. You haven't. And yes, you've reduced your in-year budget gap down, but you knew you had to balance this year's budget as well, which you've now balanced by borrowing 40 million from the public purse and adding 40 million to the public debt, and with interest on it too. And I feel, and we feel, our city deserves much better than this. And there should never, ever have been in a scenario where your only alternative was to wait for a 40 million bailout that someone else has given you and that the people of this city will pay for the next 20 years. You don't have 120 million pounds worth of capital assets available in net amounts of money to pay off the entire borrowing if you borrow it all, which means you've got to use future savings from your revenue budget to pay down the interest first, which could be 5%, 6% plus, and or to then pay down this facility that you've just drawn fully, you've maxed out fully in year one with no plan to deliver on. That is a very risky strategy, albeit you might think that there was no alternative. I can categorically tell you there was, and there would have been. And I wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now, because if this plan is implemented as per the minister's request, you guys are going to have to do it. If there's a change of government, you can deal with that accordingly. And I think, Lord Mayor, our city is in a scenario where we need to be encouraging inward investment. We need to be driving more homes, more businesses, people to invest here. The narrative needs to remain positive as much as it's a very difficult scenario to be in. And our job is not to get consumed totally within our own internal challenges, which we face and many other people face in the public and private sector. And so I hope to bring forward policies that do not just resolve around a budget. But what we see here now, because you're out of time, is the only way is to bomb things through 1,000 miles an hour to meet these deadlines. By November, probably September, you're going to be consulting with people about how you're going to reduce 40 million's worth of expenditure. And every one of you has got to sign up to those. We know you have your own divisions internally. You're a political group. We're all subject to the same challenges around views. Well, you do. We know that. We'll see that come out in May. But well, there wasn't one leadership candidate, was there? So it does. Yeah. So you will have to deal with those accordingly of how you feel best to deal with them. But I think it is very important that you know that we will not be supporting this. We would no way be in this scenario. We would never have been making this much of a gamble with the public finances of this city. I can't speak for my colleagues in opposition groups otherwise, but I don't think anyone else would want to take this risk. And the only reason you would take these levels of risk is if you know, perhaps Councillor Letts does or Councillor Filker does, that a Labour government is going to give you something more, or you really don't mind that taking the council to this much of the edge is worth less than winning the political narrative. And if that's the game, fine, that's up to you. And maybe there's a 4-yearly election cycle, maybe there isn't. But currently there's a scheduled election coming in 2 years' time. And all the things that you're doing now, this political high that you're on because you're not in government, you're not making any decisions, you're committing to a load of things, and then Keir Starmer rose back on them, are not decisions you have to make right now. But one day, very soon, if you do win, you will be. And we'll see how it all plays out. One thing's for sure, I know because I've probably been here too long now, but change is inevitable. And change will come. And the game that you think you're playing right now will come back and bite you. And unfortunately, the residents of this city will pick up the bill in the meantime. So I hope you're clearly going to pass this today, that you deliver on the objectives you say you're going to deliver on, because if you don't, we could enter a Section 114 agreement in the next 6, 8, 12 months with another 120 million up to noose round our neck for 20 years, which will have considerable impact on the residents and the businesses and the most vulnerable in this city. Lord Mayor, I'll stop there. This is a very shameful place to be as a council, and I hope that the plan that we're presented with does have the political support that it needs and the plan to make it happen. But from where I'm sat, it doesn't look like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.